April 21st, the deed is done. Blake followed our false fire on shore, and his ship broke apart on the rocks off Spivey Point. We were aided by an unearthly fog that rolled in as if heaven sent, although God had no part in our actions tonight.
In an idyllic small coastal town, an eerie mist rolls in, bringing with it retribution for sins so long forgotten. Welcome to In Awe. Today we are going to watch The Fog. Yay! The coastal town of Antonio Bay, California, is preparing for its centennial celebrations when the century-old repressed crimes of the town's founders are dragged into the open by the ghosts of the wronged. These apparitions arrive concealed in an otherworldly fog, sweeping over the doomed town like a vengeful force of nature. The Fog is a classic 1980 supernatural horror film directed by John Carpenter following his major success with Halloween 2 years earlier. Filmed from April to May 1979, it was released a year later in February 1980. Deborah Hill produced the film and also co-wrote the movie with Carpenter. The film features Jamie Lee Curtis, Tom Atkins, and John's new fiancée, Adrienne Barbeau. Each of these actors had already made an appearance in Carpenter's movies, or in the case of Atkins, will do so in the future. Just like in Halloween, the great Dean Cundey was responsible for cinematography and would return 3 more times to work with Carpenter in the future. The movie was filmed in California, mostly around Point Reyes, north of San Francisco. The church was actually located in Sierra Madre, LA. Plenty of the production crew of Halloween returned to work on The Fog. The music was again composed by Carpenter, who created another simple but effective synth theme for the movie. Rob Bottin was responsible for the makeup effects and, curiously, also played the rarely seen antagonist, Blake. He would famously return to work with Carpenter on The Thing. Tommy Lee Wallace returned as production designer and editor, having already collaborated with Carpenter on 3 previous occasions. According to Tommy, he was a bit of a jack of all trades, working on various aspects behind the scenes as a caretaker of sorts. Despite the talented crew, the movie went through a very challenging production process. After the initial version was filmed, cut, and edited, Carpenter found it to be a real mess. He conducted numerous reshoots, added additional footage, increased the gore, and included the John Houseman scene at the beginning of the film. Carpenter has stated that the released version was much more entertaining and fun than the original. Despite all the extra work, he was never quite satisfied with the final result, but nevertheless considered the movie an important learning experience. The Fog had a budget of just over $1 million. While contemporary horror classics like An American Werewolf in London, The Shining, and Poltergeist featured low 8-figure budgets, the $1 million John had for The Fog was still several times more what he had available for Halloween. The Fog became a major financial success, grossing over $20 million at the box office despite receiving very mixed reviews from critics. The movie opens with a scene of an old sailor, Mr. Mayhem, telling the town's children the story of Elizabeth Dane. It was filmed in a soundstage, and John Houseman, who played Mr. Mayhem, only spent a day on the set. The scene serves as a really effective foreshadowing and mood setting for things to come. The children look genuinely tense, and Houseman's short performance is just great.
100 years ago, on the 21st of April, out on the waters around Spivey Point, a small clipper ship drew toward land.
After that, the movie goes straight to business and introduces us to Father Malone, played by Hal Holbrook, who is enjoying his drink and having a chat with his aide Bennett, played by Carpenter himself. Bennett's only real line before leaving the scene is,
"Father, can I get paid?"
I just can't shake the feeling that this was Carpenter's middle finger for not making as much for the success of Halloween as he would have liked. Soon, weird things start to happen and a mysterious book hidden inside the wall is revealed. It turns out to be the diary of Father Malone's ancestor from 100 years ago. Weird things happen all around town. Things move on their own and electronics go haywire. We are then introduced to Nick Castle, played by the iconic Tom Atkins. He is still missing his iconic moustache at this point. All you can really do is to stare at the prime real estate between his nose and his lip and think great things will happen there soon enough. He is just one of the characters named after people close to Carpenter, as Nick Castle is, of course, the actor who played Michael Myers in Halloween and Carpenter's old classmate. Mr. Castle is enjoying his drink while driving and picks up a hitchhiker, Elizabeth Solly, played by Jamie Lee Curtis.
Other side of town.
They seem to hit off immediately, before weird events interfere with all the bonding. Up in the local lighthouse, Stevie Wayne, played by Adrienne Barbeau, is having a late-night broadcast when she receives a flirty phone call from the weather station's very own Dan O'Bannon, played by Charlie Cyphers, in some seriously white colors. He asks Stevie to reach out to a trawler about a fog bank that is closing in. In the trawler, three fishermen who are also enjoying their drink get engulfed by the fog and see a 19th century clipper coming right on side. Mysterious shapes emerge from the fog and brutally cut them all down. Meanwhile, Nick's sex appeal has been working overtime, and even without the moustache, Elizabeth has already slept with him. When suddenly, just when Mr. Castle is about to get shanked, he is literally saved by the bell. It's 1 AM and even ghosts are apparently on the clock.
From the Coast Guard. Be on the lookout for the seagrass. A 30-foot trawler, last seen approximately 15 miles east of Spivey Point.
The following morning, Stevie's kid Andy, played by Ty Mitchell, who was first seen in the intro sequence with Mr. Machen, finds a piece of driftwood at the beach with the word Dane chiseled into it. Not really caring for the well-being of his mother, he wakes her up and gives her the piece of wood. Stevie then leaves to work, driving to the lighthouse in her beautiful Kubelwagen Spider, blasting some classical tunes by Giancarlo Gazzani. The car is actually a Volkswagen Thing, which you can also see in the Carpenter's 2017 music video, Christine. Mr. Castle and his new girlfriend are now looking for Nick's friends who were on the trawler, whose fate we saw earlier, and are now lost at sea. They end up finding the corpses of Nick's friends, who have died in weird circumstances, and we are treated with a pretty effective jump scare. We are then introduced to Kathy Williams, played by the legendary Janet Leigh, and her aide Sandy Fadel, played by Nancy Loomis, another returnee from Halloween. Mrs. Williams and Sandy visit the church looking for Father Malone, who is hiding in the shadows, ready to pounce on unsuspecting worshippers. As far as jump scares go, this was one of the best I've seen. Carpenter has said that this scene was very difficult to execute as Malone was basically hiding in plain sight. Masterful.
Damn it, John, I love it when you're flying!
Father Malone then lays down some military-grade exposition from the diary he found. He reads a story of a rich leper called Blake, who wanted to found a leper colony a mile away from Antonio Bay and was ready to pay for the privilege. The 6 town elders and now co-conspirators decided to guide Blake's clipper to the rocks and then retrieve the gold for the good of the town. The repossessed gold then built Antonio Bay and its church. Mrs. Williams does the company man thing and belittles the significance of all this nonsense, where Father Malone takes it very seriously indeed.
December 11. Blake's proposition is simple.
The start of the story was dated early December, which indicates that the conspirators had ample time to premeditate their actions. Stevie Wayne arrives at the lighthouse, and just look at this view. When searching for shooting locations, finding an awe-inspiring lighthouse was deemed a priority, and boy did they find one in Point Reyes. After descending the apparently over 300 steps to the lighthouse, weird stuff again occurs, as the piece of driftwood he brought with her starts to ooze water, show the words "Six must die" and then burst into flames. I found this scene to be very memorable. Meanwhile, our lovebirds are spending some quality time at the morgue, finding out what happened to Nick's friends. While he finds out that the bodies appeared like they had drowned weeks ago, Elizabeth finds one that seemed not to have drowned at all. When the undead citizen approaches Jamie Lee Curtis from behind, some heavyweight Halloween vibes can be felt. Night is quickly approaching, and the townspeople have gathered for their centennial celebrations. Nick and Elizabeth decide to drown their traumas in a local watering hole.
On the seagrass earlier this afternoon, but there's no further word as to the condition of the ship or the men on board.
Weatherman Dan comes to work and hears about the approaching fog bank. He then calls Stevie just when the fog reaches the weather station. After all his instruments go nuts, he starts to investigate and gets killed by Blake's posse as the victim number 4. Antonio Bay suffers a blackout when the fog reaches the local power station. Meanwhile, Andy is staying at Mrs. Cobrit's while his mother is at work. Stevie tries to desperately reach out while the fog approaches the residence, and Mrs. Cobritz is the victim number 5 as Andy tries to hide. Elizabeth and Nick arrive just in time to rescue Andy, and while Elizabeth is trying to impress her new man with a mad burnout, Nick urges her to get moving and they make their escape. Stevie is back on the air, trying to warn people about the fog that has now reached the town and encourages people to rendezvous at the church. Nick, Elizabeth, Mrs. Williams, Sandy, and less than sober Father Malone barricade themselves inside and try to find answers from the book as Blake's crew approaches. Stevie is also being attacked now, trying to climb to the roof of the lighthouse. Malone and Mrs. Williams read from the Great Book of Exposition. With both brains running white hot, they realize from the diary that Blake's gold is hidden inside the walls. Apparently the elder Malone had hidden the gold from the other conspirators out of guilt and hid it in his own church. Malone then discovers the gold that has been melted into a huge cross. While the rest of the party try to fend off the nautical undead, Malone grabs the cross and marches out to offer it to Blake. That cross must weigh like 2 or 3 times more than Malone does, but maybe he has been working out. I appreciate the fact that they at least try to make it look heavy. Blake grabs the cross and the ghosts give up the pursuit and disappear with the fog. While Stevie Wayne provides us with some afterthought, Father Malone finds himself alone in his church pondering on the day's events. Blake returns one more time to make it sex, to settle accounts once and for all, and the credits roll. I first saw The Fog on VHS when I was around 10 years old, and the movie genuinely frightened me. The idea of a natural phenomenon carrying a supernatural threat that pursued you for your father's sins was deeply unsettling as a child. As a horror fan, I prioritize mood setting, build up, and atmosphere above all other aspects of the genre. In my opinion, three Carpenter movies stand out when it comes to showcasing his unmistakable talent for creating creepy, foreboding atmospheres. And those movies are The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and The Fog. And for this very reason, The Fog has always held a small but permanent place in my heart and heart. For this review, I watched the DVD from 2002 and the Blu-ray from 2018. I also ordered the 2022 4K release from a web store, and now it has been on a back order for a month. This large web store has not been helpful at all when I've tried to extract some kind of an ETA, and I finally got sick and tired and decided to go with what I have. However, the 2018 Blu-ray is perfectly nice and comes with plenty of extras. I would steer clear from the DVD version, however. Compared to the Blu-ray, it looks serviceable, yet unremarkable. Interestingly, when I searched for The Fog to find the new 4K version, the search engine actually asked me whether I meant the Meg. I did not. There is so much to say, and just finite time to say it, so I will try to be as terse as I can. Candy's cinematography was nothing short of brilliant. Like in Halloween, the crew achieved so much with very limited resources. While John Carpenter's direction deserves praise, we must also acknowledge the significant influence of Deborah Hill and Dean Cundey on his best films. The chosen filming locations were perfect. The serene beauty of Northern California's coast provided a stark contrast to the sinister threat lurking beneath the waves. Carpenter actually loved this scenery so much that he purchased a house up there, which he owned for several years. The practical special effects were another high point. While the mist created with fog machines and dry ice was famously difficult to herd towards the preferred direction, the results are just great. I also enjoyed how Blake and his crew are presented. Those obscured silhouettes of the ghostly crew keep up the terror of the unknown right until the very end. It was interesting to see how much more detail of the crew you can actually see in the modern remastered versions. I always thought that the glowing red eyes were a camera trick, but it was actually a reflective scotch light placed over the eyes of the antagonist, giving the character of Blake his ominous look. It is these little details that just inspire me every time. Today, all this would have been done with CGI, and back then all you had to go on were a couple of guys with a lot of innovation and barely enough budget for a ham sandwich. Yet you get a result that is still impressive almost half a century later. Solid acting enhanced the movie. Hal Holbrook's portrayal of Father Malone was a real high point, while John Houseman's brief yet masterful appearance set the initial mood for the rest of the film. Carpenter's score also fits the movie perfectly. It is also utilized very sparingly, and it's only there when it actually fits the scene. Carpenter often talked about making the music invisible, so that it's there just to enhance the scene, but not to draw attention to itself, and this is a good example of that. But in the end, these are just superficial factors. How does it actually perform as a horror movie? Blake's vengeful crew resembled a relentless force of nature, driven by single-mindedness and unwavering determination. They were not inherently evil, rather they swept in like the tide, wreaking havoc and then departing when their purpose was fulfilled. Despite the townspeople's innocence towards the crimes they now paid the price for, there was no clemency, no understanding, and no compromise. The debt would be paid in full, not only in gold, but in blood. Interestingly, the ghosts did not only target the descendants of the conspirators. Any 6 souls would suffice. It's eye for an eye, and any eye will do. For this, the movie has encountered criticism for not creating and following a clear set of rules. This never bothered me, however, and I think not everything needs to be explained and thoroughly understood. In the end, they are just vengeful zombie sailors from the bottom of the sea. Whether they follow a strict rulebook or not, that's their business. The horror of the fog lays in the anticipation of the unseen, the unstoppable, and the utterly inevitable. After the unsettling events in the beginning of the movie, which act as sort of a harbinger for things to come, the viewer and the townsfolk are treated with a brief respite during daylight. The evening is quickly approaching, however, and the anticipation for the inevitable night remains in the back of your mind as the viewer sees the fog slowly crawl in from the sea. Keeping the crew of Elizabeth Dane concealed in the fog kept the creepiness going until the very end, and Carpenter never showed enough to let the fear of the unknown go. If this is the sort of horror you are into, you will enjoy this as a horror movie. When you count in all I've said, and the backdrop of a small coastal town, and the menace emerging from the depths of the ocean, I cannot help but to see some Lovecraftian influence here as well, or maybe it's just me. I also couldn't help but wonder if Clive Barker drew some inspiration from the final church scene when directing Hellraiser. The entrance of Blake's crew, shrouded in illuminated fog, echoed, at least for me, the arrival of Cenobites in Barker's film. While I genuinely like the movie for all the reasons I've already mentioned, it does have some issues. Amusingly, I like the movie so much I almost feel guilty for criticizing it.
Okay, John, maybe it's time for some straight talking.
The film introduces too many characters within its fairly short runtime, without taking the time to fully develop them. Now, The Fog is not a character-driven film, but a story-driven one. I can perfectly understand and appreciate the fact that the characters are just there, random, regular people drawn together by the unfolding events. This makes the characters feel somewhat organic. They go through the motions without trying to expose their life stories to the audience for them to analyze and interpret. It almost feels like the movie doesn't even have a main cast, just a big supporting one. The protagonist is the plot. The actors are just there for support. Having embraced this view in recent years, this flaw has been bothering me less and less. Despite all that, having a cast like this and not fully harness it feels a bit wasteful. The characters portrayed by Atkins and Curtis seem somewhat shoehorned in, and Janet Leigh's character lacks any compelling depth. On the positive side, I appreciated how Stevie Wayne and Father Malone were portrayed. However, I felt there was room for further exploration. Perhaps the movie could have been longer, allowing for more character development, or alternatively, it could have focused solely on Wayne and Malone. In fact, with a shorter runtime, it might have worked well as an episode of an anthology series like Carpenter's Body Bags, Twilight Zone, or The Outer Limits. The Fog is flawed, yet a very compelling horror movie. It does so many things masterfully, but is frustratingly limited due to its flaws. I am probably the very target audience for which this movie actually works as intended, which leads me perhaps liking it more than the average viewer. The movie had all the potential to be one of Carpenter's masterpieces, but it just falls a bit short. However, whenever I am in the presence of the movie's accomplishments, one has to stand in awe.
Welcome back to the fight, John. Sorry if I was a little rough on you back there.
Oh yeah, there's a remake, I almost forgot. This 2005 movie has an abysmal reputation and I have therefore always avoided it. Whereas the original one was directed by the master of horror, the remake was directed by the man who made the music video for MC Hammer's Can't Touch This. Well, coming from a different angle, it was produced by Carpenter and Deborah Hill, so it can't be all bad. Let's give this one a chance. I'm going to watch the 2005 remake from a DVD, so see you on the other side.
Bloody hell, that was tough to watch.
I don't want to do a deep dive here. The movie is just bad. I like watching good movies, I like watching bad movies as long as they entertain me. This one is neither of those. But it must be said, there have been movies I just had to stop watching, and this was not one of those either. But let's briefly break it down and go through a few positives first, and believe me, they are very few and far between. The cinematography is not terrible, there were a couple of interesting shots. The picture quality on DVD is pretty darn good. The movie is filled with terrible early 2000s CGI, but the few times the movie actually makes the effort to show a practical effect, they were not that bad. The cast performs as you'd expect. The main cast of Tom Welling, who plays Nick Castle, and Maggie Grace, who plays Elizabeth, give what they have to give. When they were cast for their respective roles, it was because they are very beautiful people, not necessarily because of their great acting, but they are watchable. I like Selma Blair as an actor, but I think she is just miscast here as Stevie Wayne. Unlike Adrienne Barbeau, Blair just doesn't have the voice to be a convincing radio host.
Because I'm going to turn it up on 94.5 KAB.
And there is some serious talent in the supporting cast, in the form of Rade Serbegia, who plays Blake, and the legendary Kenneth Welsh, who plays Tom Malone. They are both good actors, but are just horribly underutilized. Why even cast them if you give them nothing to do? Look, I can see no value in pointing out an endless list of this film's failures. While I enjoy bashing things as much as the next sourpuss, this carcass has already been kicked around enough by everybody else. The movie is just extraordinary in its mediocrity. It manages to be boringly simple yet overly complicated at the same time. It's not scary, not even in the least. It does nothing better than the original, neither does it address any of its problems, and like so many other bad remakes, it fails to understand why the original one was so loved. The 2005 version of The Fog has no reason to exist. So, what are your thoughts on The Fog? Would you like to comment at all? Would you like to get offended by something I said and maybe let it escalate out of control in the comments section? If you want to see more content, please like and subscribe, and if you don't, then that's okay too. God bless you, sir.
Right, let's get the hell out of here before they arrive.